guitar I've ever played. It's just got a good sound to it.
Imagine standing on the edge of a concert stage, the smell of beer and cigarettes hanging in the air, and hearing a crowd roar not just for the music, but for the rebellion behind it. That's the world Willie Nelson and Kris Kristofferson helped build. A world where country music stopped being polite background noise and became a raw, unfiltered expression of life itself. Their partnership was never simple. At times, they were brothers in arms, united against a system that wanted to mold them into something they weren't. At other times, they seemed like rivals, two men chasing the same spotlight, the same respect, and even, as rumors suggest, the same woman. But what makes their story more than just another tale of stardom is the way it mirrors the struggles of American music itself. Willie Nelson was the underdog, constantly underestimated, told his voice wasn't radio-friendly and his appearance didn't match the polished Nashville standard. Kris Kristofferson, by contrast, seemed born for drama, a soldier-turned-scholar-turned-poet whose songs carried the weight of war, guilt, and philosophy. Nashville didn't know what to do with either of them, yet both refused to bend. In pushing back, they not only reinvented themselves but helped redefine country music for an entire generation. The 1960s and 70s were a time of cultural revolution in America. War protests, civil rights marches, a younger generation breaking free from the old rules. The same rebellion spilled into music. Rock was tearing down barriers. Folk music was igniting movements. And country, well, country was stuck in a rut. Nashville executives wanted squeaky clean performers singing predictable lyrics about small-town life, heartbreak, and Saturday nights. For artists like Willie and Kris, this formula felt like a cage. They weren't content to just sing about life. They wanted to tell the truth about it, with all its scars, contradictions, and dark corners. Their friendship, however, was never straightforward. At first, Kris seemed to have everything Willie lacked: the critical acclaim, the Grammys, even the glamorous film roles. Willie, meanwhile, was grinding away, watching others sing his songs while his own albums flopped. It's not hard to imagine the frustration. You write classics like Crazy and Hello Walls, but the world still treats you like a second-class act. When Kris made his daring helicopter stunt to get Johnny Cash's attention, it made headlines. When Willie took risks, Nashville just shrugged. That imbalance laid the seeds for whispers of rivalry that would follow them for decades. Yet, the irony is that they needed each other. Without Kris, Willie might never have left Nashville for Texas, the move that allowed him to reinvent himself. Without Willie, Kris might never have found the outlaw brotherhood that gave his poetry a louder stage. They were opposites, but also mirrors, each reflecting what the other feared, desired, or struggled to become. This video will peel back the layers of that complicated bond. We'll trace their beginnings as misfits in Nashville, their rise as pioneers of the outlaw movement, the silent wounds caused by jealousy and love triangles, and the personal battles that nearly destroyed them both. Along the way, we'll see how their friendship was tested by fame, scandal, and even the IRS, and why, despite it all, their legacy endures. So, were Willie Nelson and Kris Kristofferson truly rivals? Or were they brothers bound by rebellion, carrying scars that only the other could understand? The answer, as you'll discover, is more tangled and far more human than either label can capture. By the late 1960s, Nashville wasn't just a city, it was a fortress. The record labels, radio stations, and executives who controlled it acted like gatekeepers of culture. They dictated what country music sounded like, how performers dressed, and even how they behaved off stage for decades. This formula worked: clean-cut singers in matching suits, carefully crafted heartbreak ballads, and safe, predictable lyrics about small towns and Saturday nights. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Willie Nelson and Kris Kristofferson stood right at those cracks, two outsiders pushing against the walls of the system. Their stories showed just how suffocating Nashville could be for anyone unwilling to play along. Willie came to town in the late 1950s, eager to make it as a performer. Instead, he was shunted into the background as a songwriter. Ironically, his songs became huge successes when other people sang them. Crazy, recorded by Patsy Cline, and Hello Walls, performed by Farron Young, turned into classics. But when Willie tried to sing his own material, executives balked. His voice was too nasal, too unconventional. His delivery didn't fit the polished Nashville mold. Worse, he didn't look the part. They wanted their stars neat and shiny, not scruffy, brooding, and stubbornly independent. Kris Kristofferson's struggle was different, but equally telling. Here was a man with credentials Nashville should have loved: a West Point graduate, a Rhodes Scholar, and a decorated Army officer. Yet when he decided to pursue music, he was treated as if he had crashed a party uninvited. His songs weren't the simple three-chord ditties the radio demanded. They were poetic, layered with themes of war trauma, guilt, and human fragility. Songs like Sunday Morning, Coming Down, and Me and Bobby McGee didn't sound like anything on the charts. They were too raw, too reflective, instead of being welcomed. Kris ended up sweeping floors at Columbia Studios just to be near the industry he longed to join. The contrast between the two men is fascinating. Willie was a native son of country music, a Texas troubadour who had paid his dues inside the Nashville machine. Kris was the intellectual outsider, an academic and soldier who seemed almost too refined for the honky-tonks. Yet both were misfits. Nashville didn't know what to do with them, and so both men faced rejection, humiliation, and long stretches of being overlooked. The turning point came in 1970 with one of the most infamous stunts in country music history. Determined to be heard, Kris commandeered a National Guard helicopter, landed it on Johnny Cash's lawn, and handed him a demo tape. Cash was so impressed by Sunday Morning Coming Down that he performed it live on his television show. That single performance cracked Nashville's walls wide open. Suddenly, the same executives who had dismissed Kris were scrambling to profit from his success. Meanwhile, Willie was still stuck in the system. His label dressed him in sharp suits, plastered his hair down, and forced him into slick orchestral arrangements that buried his natural sound. Nothing worked. His albums failed to chart, and his confidence sank. But then came a moment of recognition. Kris, now with some clout, encouraged Willie to leave Nashville entirely. Texas was brewing something new, a counterculture of long-haired cowboys, hippies, and bikers who wanted country music to be real again. If Nashville was the fortress, Texas was the open frontier. Looking back, this period highlights the irony of the Nashville system. It rejected two of the men who would later save country music from stagnation. Both Willie and Kris proved that success doesn't always come from fitting in. Sometimes it comes from breaking out and creating a new lane altogether. By the early 1970s, Willie Nelson had reached his breaking point. Years of rejection in Nashville had left him exhausted and questioning whether music was worth the fight. Imagine pouring your soul into songs that would become iconic when others sang them, only to be dismissed when you performed your own work. That kind of frustration eats away at a person. For Willie, the final straw came after yet another failed attempt to mold him into something he wasn't. The suits, the polished hair, the string-laden arrangements. None of it felt like him. And none of it worked. Then came a turning point, thanks in part to Kris Kristofferson, having finally broken through. Kris recognized what Nashville refused to see, Willie's genius as a performer, not just a songwriter. He urged Willie to leave the system behind and head home to Texas. It was advice that changed everything. Texas in the early 1970s was a different world. While Nashville clung to its formula, Texas bars and dance halls were buzzing with a new kind of energy. Cowboys with long hair stood shoulder to shoulder with hippies in tie-dye. Bikers, ranch hands, students, all were gathering in places like Austin's Armadillo World Headquarters to hear music that was rough, real, and unconstrained. This wasn't about fitting a radio format. It was about authenticity in this environment. Willie didn't seem out of place. He seemed like the leader everyone had been waiting for. When Willie arrived in Austin, he reinvented himself almost overnight. Gone were the suits and tidy haircuts. In their place came the long braids, the scruffy beard, and the casual clothes that would become his trademark. More importantly, gone was the attempt to fit in with anyone else's expectations. For the first time, Willie was performing exactly as he wanted to, and the audience loved it. Crowds packed into every venue he played, not because they had heard his songs on the radio, but because they felt something powerful in his authenticity. It's striking how much this shift reveals about American culture at the time. The early 70s were a period of rebellion. The Vietnam War was dragging on. Watergate was shaking trust in government, and young people were rejecting the old rules. Willie's transformation fit right into that mood. He wasn't just making music. He was giving voice to a generation disillusioned with authority. His songs about heartbreak, wandering, and survival resonated with people who wanted honesty over perfection. Out of this moment came the birth of what would later be called Outlaw Country. Along with Kris, Waylon Jennings, and others, Willie helped pioneer a style that rejected Nashville's polish and embraced grit. They weren't singing for executives in offices. They were singing for people in bars, fields, and back roads. The music was rebellious, but it was also deeply human. It said, "We're flawed, we're messy, and we're real." Willie's first major step into this new identity came with the album Shotgun Willie in 1973. Critics and fans alike recognized it as the sound of a man finally freed from his chains. It wasn't just an album, it was a declaration. Willie was no longer Nashville's failed experiment. He was a force of nature, and his time had finally come. Looking back, it's hard not to admire the risk Willie took. Most artists in his position would have quit. Instead, he tore up the script, left the capital of country music, and bet everything on authenticity. In doing so, he not only saved his own career but helped steer country music into one of its most influential eras. When Willie Nelson found freedom in Texas, and Kris Kristofferson soared to stardom in Nashville and Hollywood, their friendship entered its most complicated phase. On the surface, they were allies, two poets who had broken free from the shackles of the Nashville machine. But underneath ran a current of tension, the kind that grows when two people are chasing the same dream, but arrive at different times. For years, Kris seemed untouchable. He had Grammys, critical acclaim, and even leading roles in films. By the mid-1970s, he starred alongside Barbra Streisand in A Star is Born, becoming as much a Hollywood presence as a country troubadour. To the outside world, Kris was proof that an outlaw poet could capture both the hearts of critics and the glamour of the big screen. Willie, meanwhile, had only just begun carving out his identity in Austin. He was reinventing himself and building momentum. But the disparity in recognition stung. Think about it. Willie had written some of the most beloved songs in country history, yet he was still seen as the scrappy underdog. Kris, with his intellectual mystique and Hollywood charm, became the poster child for the outlaw spirit. It's no wonder whispers began to circulate. Were they truly brothers? Or were they rivals dressed as friends? The truth lies somewhere in between. Their bond was genuine. They shared stages, collaborated, and celebrated each other's successes. But human nature makes comparison inevitable. Willie couldn't ignore that Kris was living a version of success he had long desired. And Kris couldn't ignore that Willie, with his raw authenticity and growing grassroots following, had something that Hollywood polish could never replicate: the loyalty of everyday people who saw themselves in his music. Hollywood played an especially disruptive role. For Kris, acting wasn't just a side project. It was another avenue of expression, but it pulled him away from music, and at times, from his roots. Films like Convoy and Heaven's Gate earned him visibility, yet they also distanced him from the outlaw country movement that had first embraced him. Willie, in contrast, doubled down on music. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, his albums were topping charts, his concerts were selling out stadiums, and he had become the face of outlaw country itself. Some say the tables turned almost overnight. The man once dismissed by Nashville executives became the king of country music, while the poet-soldier who had once seemed unstoppable began struggling with personal demons, alcoholism, failed relationships, and an unpredictable Hollywood career chipped away at Kris's image. Meanwhile, Willie's star only grew brighter. For the first time, the imbalance leaned in the opposite direction, and speculation arose. Was Kris now jealous of Willie? It's easy to frame this as rivalry, but perhaps it's better understood as a story of timing. Kris was a trailblazer who cracked the walls of Nashville first, but Willie was the one who built a whole new world on the other side. Both roles were essential. Without Kris, Willie might never have found the courage to break free. Without Willie, Kris's intellectual rebellion might have faded as a passing curiosity. Together, even when separated by jealousy or comparison, they represented the two sides of rebellion, the thinker and the survivor. Their friendship endured because both men knew what the other had sacrificed to stand outside the Nashville system. They didn't have to like every chapter of each other's journey, but they respected it. And in country music, where authenticity is everything, that kind of respect was stronger than rivalry. Every great story of friendship and rivalry seems to have a third character, someone whose presence changes the chemistry entirely. For Willie Nelson and Kris Kristofferson, that person was Rita Coolidge. Rita was more than just a beautiful voice. She was a presence that lit up every room she entered. By the early 1970s, she was collaborating with legends like Eric Clapton, Leon Russell, and Joe Cocker. Her talent and free-spirited charm made her one of the most sought-after women in the industry. To some, she was the muse of a generation. But to Willie and Kris, she was something far more personal. In 1973, Rita married Kris Kristofferson. Their marriage burned bright but turbulent, a mix of passion, creativity, jealousy, and destructive behavior. Kris, already known for his heavy drinking and unpredictable moods, struggled with the demands of fame and intimacy. Rita later recalled how their love was real but chaotic, filled with highs so intense they couldn't possibly last. For Kris, she became both his greatest love and his deepest regret. But even before Kris and Rita were a couple, whispers suggested she had shared a connection with Willie Nelson. The details remain hazy, as neither Rita nor Willie confirmed the nature of their bond. Was it a brief romance? A deep friendship mistaken for something more? In the tight-knit and rumor-driven world of country music, the line between truth and speculation often blurs. What mattered wasn't necessarily what happened, but what people thought had happened. For Kris, that possibility was enough to fuel insecurity. He had a possessive streak when it came to love, and Rita's history, real or rumored, may have cast a shadow over his bond with Willie, even if nothing tangible existed. The suspicion alone could stir tension. The idea that his closest friend might have once been linked to his wife lingered like smoke in the air, unspoken yet impossible to ignore. This dynamic reveals something universal about friendship. We can forgive career jealousy or creative competition, but when love becomes entangled, wounds run deeper. The Rita Coolidge chapter wasn't just about a woman, it was about trust, loyalty, and the fragile balance between personal and professional lives. When their marriage eventually collapsed in 1980, Kris admitted it was one of the greatest regrets of his life. Rita herself spoke candidly about the chaos of their relationship, the volatility, the mistrust, the sense of constantly patching cracks in the foundation. Willie, on the other hand, never publicly fueled the rumors. He remained characteristically laid back, letting the gossip swirl without adding fire. But that didn't erase the suspicion that Rita had, at one time, stood between the two men. Looking back, Rita Coolidge's role in their story shows how easily personal lives can bleed into professional partnerships. For Willie and Kris, she became a symbol of both passion and fracture. She represented the vulnerability beneath their outlaw personas. These men could stand against record labels, critics, and even the law. But love was an opponent neither of them could outwit. Their friendship survived, but not without scars. Whenever Rita's name surfaced, so did the silent wounds. It's a reminder that even icons, men celebrated for their defiance and artistry, are still human. They hurt, they get jealous, and they struggle with the same messy entanglements the rest of us do, in many ways. That's why their story continues to resonate beneath the myth of Outlaw Country. There were fragile hearts navigating the same storms as everyone else. For all the creativity and rebellion that defined their music, Willie Nelson and Kris Kristofferson were never immune to chaos. In fact, their personal lives often mirrored the turbulence of their songs. Messy, dramatic, and unforgettable. If the Outlaw label once symbolized artistic freedom, it soon came to represent their offstage battles as well. Kris Kristofferson's struggles were deeply personal. His drinking, always part of his image, began to erode his career and relationships. Hollywood loved him for a time, the rugged ex-soldier with a poet's soul, but success came with pressure. He wasn't built to manage. Friends recalled how alcohol turned his charm into volatility, his sensitivity into mood swings. While he never disappeared from the spotlight, his career slowed, and his personal reputation often preceded him. For an artist who had once been the golden boy, it was a painful descent. Willie Nelson's storms, by contrast, came from a mix of poor financial advice, legal trouble, and his own restless heart. Unlike Kris, who sabotaged himself with alcohol, Willie's downfall was shaped by the people he trusted. His financial managers led him into one of the largest tax scandals in music history. By 1990, the IRS claimed he owed $16.7 million in unpaid taxes, a staggering figure that nearly destroyed him. His ranch, recording studios, and even prize guitars were seized. Practically overnight, one of country's richest icons was on the verge of ruin. But Willie was nothing if not resourceful. Instead of declaring bankruptcy and retreating in shame, he turned the crisis into art. With his daughter Lana, he recorded the IRS tapes, Who Will Buy My Memories, a stripped-down acoustic album sold directly to fans. with proceeds going toward his tax debt. It was an unprecedented move, almost absurd in its audacity, yet perfectly on brand for Willie. Fans rallied behind him, buying the album not just for the music, but as a show of solidarity. It was proof that while governments could seize property, they couldn't take away the bond between Willie and his audience. Of course, money wasn't Willie's only scandal. His love life was just as notorious. He married multiple times, carried on affairs, and fathered children outside of marriage. One story stands out as emblematic of his chaotic approach to relationships. His second wife, Shirley Colley, once opened a hospital bill addressed to their home. To her shock, it was for the birth of a child that wasn't hers. That baby, Paula Nelson, was the daughter of Willie and another woman, Connie Kupke. The discovery led to a bitter divorce. Even after marrying Connie, Willie continued his pattern of infidelity, leading to yet another broken marriage, as he later admitted with a characteristic shrug. "I wasn't always the best husband. Let's just say I had a hard time saying no." If love was complicated, so was Willie's relationship with the law. His open embrace of marijuana became both a signature trait and a recurring legal headache. Arrested multiple times across decades, he was as likely to make headlines for possession as for a hit record. Authorities relished the chance to make an example of him, but Willie leaned into his outlaw reputation, turning each bust into part of his larger-than-life persona. What makes this chapter compelling is not the scandals themselves, but the resilience they revealed. Kris battled alcoholism, yet never lost his artistic voice. Willie survived the IRS and his own romantic wreckage with humor and stubbornness. Both men proved that survival wasn't about staying clean or perfect. It was about outlasting the storms, learning to laugh at the absurdities, and continuing to create. In the end, the scandals that could have ruined them became part of their mythology. Fans didn't love them despite their flaws. They loved them because of their flaws. The messiness made the music real. When we step back and look at the lives of Willie Nelson and Kris Kristofferson, what emerges is not a neat story of heroes and villains, winners and losers. Instead, we see two men whose lives were as tangled and contradictory as the songs they sang. They were brothers and rivals, partners and competitors, inspirations and irritations to one another. And yet, despite the scandals, the jealousy, and the silent wounds, their bond endured. What made their connection so resilient? Perhaps it was the recognition that each carried scars the other understood. Willie knew the frustration of being dismissed and underestimated. Kris knew the pain of wrestling with demons that never quite let go. They stood on different paths, but both walked through storms that would have broken lesser men. That mutual understanding created a kind of brotherhood stronger than fleeting envy or whispered rumors. Their legacies, too, are inseparable. Willie became the face of Outlaw Country, the man who turned Texas honky-tonks into temples of authenticity and transformed rebellion into mainstream success. Kris became the poet-philosopher, the artist who brought literary depth to country songwriting and showed that Nashville could handle songs about guilt, war, and human fragility. Each man filled a gap the other left open. Without Willie's stubborn survival, Outlaw Country might have fizzled out as a niche movement. Without Kris's intellectual daring, the movement might have lacked credibility. Together, they gave country music its most rebellious and enduring chapter. Their flaws were part of that legacy. Willie's financial disasters, messy love life, and run-ins with the law didn't ruin him. They made him relatable. Fans saw in him the flawed hero who kept going. the man who could lose everything and still crack a joke while writing another song. Kris's battles with alcohol, his unpredictable Hollywood ventures, and his volatile relationships didn't erase his artistry. They underscored it. His songs about suffering and regret carried weight because they came from a man who had lived them, in an industry obsessed with image. Both men proved that vulnerability could be just as powerful as polish. There's also a lesson here for anyone chasing a dream. Nashville tried to squeeze them into boxes that didn't fit, and for years. It looked like the system had won, yet both men found their greatest success only when they stopped trying to conform. Willie grew his hair, shed the suits, and played music on his own terms. Kris risked ridicule to write songs that went deeper than commercial radio wanted. Their stories remind us that true success isn't about being accepted by the gatekeepers. It's about finding the audience that resonates with who you really are. Today, as Willie Nelson continues to perform well into his 90s, and Kris Kristofferson enjoys his quieter years, their impact is undeniable. They changed not only country music, but the very idea of what it means to be an artist. Their friendship, scarred but unbroken, shows us that rivalry doesn't have to destroy connection. Sometimes it sharpens it, forcing each person to grow in ways they never would have alone. So, were they rivals or brothers? The answer is both. They competed, they clashed, and they hurt one another. But in the end, they stood side by side in reshaping the landscape of American music. Their story is not about perfection, but about resilience, honesty, and the courage to keep going. And maybe that's why their music still matters. It tells us that life is messy, friendship is complicated, and greatness often comes not from avoiding scars, but from carrying them with pride.